Americans continually try to reform, revolutionize, and change our education system, and yet they've continued to fail. Now, I will be talking about the underfunding of elementary schools in the United States and how this affects students and their futures. So, two of the biggest issues with our education system are the fact that students from low-income communities are not receiving the proper aid that they need to be successful in their future. And also the fact that we're not teaching our students about diversity and culture to make it a more inclusive environment for students of culture, or for students of color. Now, students are expected to go to college after high school in today's society if they want to find a job, if they want to be successful. However, for many low-income students, they're not provided the resources to understand what they need for college, tests they have to take, and FAFSA or money to be able to go to college. And another big issue for low-income students trying to go to college is either they're the first person in their family to go to college, making it very difficult to figure out the process. Their parents, for many of them, their parents can't speak English, which also makes the process a lot more difficult. And they also don't know what's needed or expected for college, so it kind of makes it this scary, ominous presence that they don't want to follow or don't want to go into. And I believe that elementary school is where most of our learning happens as students, which is why I'm focusing on the underfunding of elementary schools. So we must, let's see. Okay, so this is my first. In this slide, you can see this is the nationwide budget cuts. This is our most recent one from 2017 to 2018, and this is how much their budget has been cut in each of these states per student. And then this one, which is a little bit harder to see, but this is from 2008 all the way to 2016, and it's the percent of budget cuts per student as well throughout that period of years. The top one being Oklahoma at 24.2% budget cuts in the last 8 years. And so this shows that we need to properly fund and educate our students to ensure their success in the future. And according to Holzer and Baum, students from low-income neighborhoods tend to attend schools with weaker performance. And I believe that this directly correlates to the fact that they don't have a lot of help and support at home. And then not having the support at home, coming to school, they're not receiving the support that they need as well. I also reviewed a case study by Catherine Lily Compton, which explained, she went into a personal story following Miss Rodriguez and her daughter over the span of 10 years. And she studied how the effects of living in poverty as well as growing up and going to school in a low-income community affected the success of Miss Rodriguez's daughter. Now, the difference between this case study and many of the typical cases with low-income families was that Miss Rodriguez was there to support her daughter. She read to her every day. She took care of her financially as much as she could, and she made sure she stayed in school. Most students who come from low-income communities don't have that same experience. Their parents are working, doing drugs, not at home to take care of them. They have to learn how to read by themselves, write by themselves. They have no support at home. And then again in school, they're not receiving after-school support or anything because of the low funding that the schools are receiving. So for me personally, growing up in Modesto, California, I experienced a lot of this, or I saw a lot of this low-income struggle, or students from low-income communities struggling. Modesto's high gang and crime rate, very low income, and high poverty. And growing up, I attended the highest scoring or highest succeeding elementary school in our community. And it wasn't until I went to college, I went to high school, where I attended the least scoring high school in our community, the lowest income, very high impoverished area. And I started to realize that many students were not ready for college. They didn't have support at home. And another big thing that I noticed growing up was most all low-income students only took CP classes. They never focused on AP classes or honors classes because they didn't receive that in their elementary schools. That wasn't given or provided to them. Honors classes, they weren't allowed to take those throughout elementary school, and so they never strived to achieve for more. They just wanted to do what was the basic. And another thing that really made me inspired by this whole idea of underfunding in elementary schools was the fact that nearly 30% of my freshman class never graduated high school. And most either because, again, they don't receive the support from their school or their families, or they think they just follow what their families have taught them, which is you just need to work and get a job, and they're not taught to go to college and to further their education to become more successful. And then also in high school, one of my close friends started a nonprofit organization called Book Buddies, where we went to the impoverished schools in our community, and we brought them a book and a stuffed animal for each student, ages kindergarten to second grade. And I think that was when I really saw the difference between my school growing up, Lakewood, where we had PTA, parent involvement, arts, PE, recess. We got to do all the fun stuff, and our families were supporting us, to going to Burbank, where there was no parent involvement. Students just receiving a book and a stuffed animal was the best day of their life, because they don't have books at home, and they aren't given that support of learning how to read and write, and they aren't given the support of learning how to read and write at home with their families. And I also think that Book Buddies helped to show me. So this is, you can see here, this is the poverty, or the percentage difference of local funding per state in high and low income areas. So as you can see, California is one of the worst with the differences between the fundings in high and low income areas, with a 10% gap. And then this would be how the map would look if we had, this is with only state funding, and this is if we had federal funding as well. So it would actually help a lot if we could federally fund a lot of these communities that are here in orange and red, to help them gain more support for their students. And then here we also can see how much state revenue versus federal revenue. And then to me, I was focusing on the local revenue. Almost 45% of our local revenue, or of our school's income, comes from local revenue. So when you have low-income areas and you're expecting the locals to provide support for these schools, 45% of the support, then the low-income areas automatically are going to be getting less money, when in reality they need more support for their students. And then here is the public school system spending per pupil by state. And so as you can see, a lot of our eastern states have some of the highest spending per pupil. And then you come over to California, Nevada, Arizona, places like that, where you have a lot less funding for their students. So I think we need to somehow figure some sort of education reform to help neutralize it completely, so that everybody is getting the same amount of funding instead of it being such a drastic difference throughout the state. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
so much harder for me when I don't write it all out. But I need to, like, get my brain to work like that more. So I just get very, I don't know, I always get nervous and then I forget. It all leaves my brain. I always feel like